Welcome to The Bottom Line, where we unpack some of the main business and economic stories of the day. I am your host, Alexandra Marchewicz. Now, Russia's long-time reliance on energy exports is facing a new chapter as the final halt to gas transit via Ukraine rattles the status quo. The question is, can the Russian economy remain resilient through 2025, and what role might a second Trump presidency play? And at the heart of it all, there is a pressing matter of how Moscow can keep financing the ongoing war. So to help us make sense of these complex issues, I'm joined by Sergey Vakulenko, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here.
So with the final stop to gas transit through Ukraine, how will this reshape Russia's energy export dynamics? And will Russia feel the pinch?
Well, Russia will lose 15 billion cubic meters of exports. That gas will stay in the ground in Yamal Peninsula. Russia would lose a few $1 billion of revenue on the face of it. Albeit, it's actually interesting because if we assume that gas prices go up in Europe with reduced supply, then Russia would be earning a bit more on the remaining 15 billion cubic meters that are going to Europe. Also, Russia has increased its exports to China. Last year, it was 30 billion cubic meters. From this year onwards, it will be 38 billion cubic meters, and Russia would earn something like $3 billion on the additional 8 billion cubic meters going to China. So, money-wise, it's almost a wash for Russia when it comes to losing these volumes. Of course, if Russia would keep these volumes, it would be an increase, or Chinese exports would be an increase. But on the other hand, Russia earns at the moment $500 million in 1 day of oil exports. So the $4 or $5 billion that are lost on the gas exports via Ukraine is 10 days of revenue of oil exports. Well, still, every billion counts, but it's not a major principal sum of money for Russia.
So no pinch at all then?
Well, it is a pinch. War is an expensive undertaking. Russian, what economists call terms of trade with the rest of the world worsened. Russia has to pay more for its exports than it did before the war started. So there is a pinch, but not a drastic one.
Now, it seems that the fate of Russia is also intertwined with what the US might do. And Donald Trump has promised to drill, baby, drill, aiming to flood markets with the US crude and drive oil prices down. Is this strategy a real threat to Russian oil revenues, given Russia's relatively low production costs?
There was a response to this plan from a number of executives of US oil companies, and they've pointed that there is a contradiction in terms. US oil production can grow if oil prices are high, $70 a barrel or higher. If US oil prices are $60 a barrel or lower, they would go down by 1 million barrels per day, per annum, or something like that. So either Donald Trump would like to see US oil production growing, and for that he'd need high prices, or if he'd like to see low prices and US production growing, he would have to subsidize US oil production quite heavily. But this would contradict with his plans to lower US taxes and lower US inflation. So it's hard to find a way for him to make this whole scheme work.
And even
besides,
if... Right. And even
besides, sorry.
Pardon me, continue.
Russian oil production is actually quite cheaper than US oil production. So if oil price goes down, your Russian oil would stay in the market. Russia would earn much less money, of course. For example, if the global oil prices are $50 per barrel compared to 60 or 70 it is at the moment. So yes, total Russian revenues would be lower, but Russian production wouldn't be reduced.
Right, and especially given that, I wonder, because even if the US output rises, Russia can still produce oil profitably at around $17 a barrel within existing fields.
$17 barrel is something like a break-even price. So that's how much money Russia has to earn in its seaports. It probably is going to spend something like $10 a barrel for transportation of its oil to places like India and China, but everything above it is profit for the country as a whole. Of course, currently at $50, $60, $70 a barrel, oil companies pay a lot of tax. If oil prices drop to $20 a barrel or something like that, it would be the state that would mostly suffer. Oil companies would stay mostly whole. But then, of course, if this happens, state oil revenue would come to almost zero, but Russia would keep producing.
Right. So do you think that now Trump energy policy is not a threat to Russia?
Well, when it comes to drill, baby drill, it's probably not. I don't really see how this plan could work. When it comes to a wide sanctioning campaign, like, for example, the one Trump unleashed on Iran in 2018, 2019, in theory, that could work. That would require a very substantial expenditure of US political capital. This would require a lot of pressure on India and China to make these countries stop buying Russian crude, a lot of threats on them, and probably some of these threats would have to be followed through. Some of the larger Chinese and Indian companies would have to be sanctioned to show that these threats are for real. Then probably purchases of Russian crude would dwindle, not to zero. There are at least pipeline supplies from Russia to China would still be in there, but dwindle. However, what this might cause, if you subtract the volumes of Russian oil from the market, there's very little they can be replaced with. Gulf countries' production, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, is just not enough to replace what would be taken out of Russia. This wasn't the case with Iran. With Iran, it was 2-3 million barrels per day that were subtracted, and this could be replenished by Russian, Saudi, Emirati production. Russia exports more than 7 million barrels per day of oil and oil products. This is hard to replace. So this would be a rather cavalier move trying to do so, and it's unclear whether Russia would suffer because its volumes would dwindle, or it would stay even or maybe even better because the prices would skyrocket. In fact, skyrocketing of prices is something that the Western coalition was trying to prevent when it was creating the price cap policy instead of sanctioning Russia straight in 2022.
So as the conflict rides on, where is Moscow finding the capital to continue military operations, especially under multiple sanctions? Because to what extent can relatively low oil production costs and ongoing energy exports keep funding the war?
Well, mostly oil exports, well, to some extent gas exports, is indeed what keeps Russian economy going, but not only. Oil and gas is roughly half of Russian exports. The rest is metals, other products, equipment and like to countries like India, China, and so on. Russia had a very substantial stash of currency. Some of that has been seized by European Central Bank, but there was still a sizable amount of reserves in China. But what Russia is doing at the moment, it diverts more and more its expenditure from the civilian sector to military sector. So what it does, it decreases civilian consumption by increasing military consumption. The high interest rates that are currently in place are in there to make civilian sector to spend as little as possible on capital expenditure. What it does, it effectively pawns the future of the country. Less capital expenditure today means lower productivity of the economy tomorrow, but it adds more resources to the military expenditure today, and it adds to productivity of the military sector where these high interest rates do not apply.
And some forecasts, in fact, predict continued resilience for Russia in 2025, despite sanctions and global uncertainties. How long can they keep up, really?
Again, what's going on? Russia can keep up its military production and grow its military production at the expense of civilian, citizen, private demand. That's what's going on already. The state is making the citizens tighten their belts, it jacks up the taxes, and so on. But Russia wasn't living that bad in the last few years. If you look at people's home, their garages, their furniture, their white goods, the stuff in their closets, it's much better than what they had in the 80s. So there is enough of accumulated capital that people can live on relatively comfortably for quite a few years. And that's what government is relying on. That's what's happening at the moment. The diversion of capital, diversion of resources from private consumption to state consumption for military purposes.
Now, I feel like the question remains, how long will it really take and what means it really these couple of years? Thank you so much, sir, for joining us, and thank you so much for your expert input.
Thank you.
Now that was Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center, and that was his bottom line for today. And remember that in the world of business, the bottom line is the only line that counts. Alexandra Marhevi signing off. Goodbye.